The doors were locked, the windows were sealed, the air inside was thick with disinfectant and fear. In a room hidden behind barbed wire and guarded by armed men, a prisoner was strapped to a table, not for execution, not for interrogation, but for research. This is not a story about the battlefield. This is a story about what happened behind it. In this video, we will uncover 20 disturbing and little-discussed facts about human experimentation during the Second World War. We will examine real testimonies, documented trials, survivor accounts, and the chilling logic that turned doctors into executioners. From frozen limbs in the name of aviation research to deliberate infection with deadly diseases, from surgical mutilation without anesthesia to biological warfare tests on entire villages, these events were not rumors. They were recorded, photographed, and later judged in courtrooms that struggled to comprehend what had been done. This is not fiction. These are documented crimes of science without conscience. And we begin in the heart of Nazi Germany. It's great to have you here. If you enjoy these war journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought in the comments below. This helps others find their way here too. For now, let's begin our journey. One of the most infamous names associated with human experimentation is Joseph Mengele. But focusing only on him would oversimplify a far larger system. The experiments conducted inside camps such as Auschwitz were not the actions of a single sadistic individual. They were part of a broader network involving physicians, universities, military officials, and pharmaceutical companies. Fact number 1. Many of the doctors involved were highly educated professionals. These were not untrained extremists dragged into brutality. Many held medical degrees, had published research, and belonged to respected institutions. Some were members of elite scientific organizations. They viewed their actions not as crimes, but as contributions to national survival. In Auschwitz, Mengele focused obsessively on twins. Survivors later testified that upon arrival at the camp, twins were immediately separated from the general population. They were measured, photographed, injected with unknown substances, subjected to blood transfusions between siblings, and sometimes deliberately infected with diseases. If one twin died, the other was often killed so that comparative autopsies could be performed. Fact number 2. Experiments were often disguised as medical examinations. Victims were told they were receiving treatment or participating in harmless tests. In reality, many procedures were fatal. Prisoners had no right to refuse. Consent did not exist. Refusal could mean immediate execution. But Germany was not alone in conducting wartime human experimentation. In occupied China, the Japanese Imperial Army operated a secret facility known as Unit 731. Officially labeled a water purification department, it was in reality a biological and chemical warfare research center. Fact number 3. Unit 731 conducted live vivisections without anesthesia. Former staff members later testified that prisoners, including Chinese civilians, Soviet captives, and even children, were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, and anthrax. When symptoms developed, victims were dissected alive to observe organ damage in real time. Anesthesia was rarely used, as researchers believed it would distort results. Entire villages were used as testing grounds. Plague-infesting fleas were dropped from aircraft to study infection spread. Thousands died not knowing they were part of a military experiment. Fact number 4. Freezing experiments were conducted to simulate downed pilots in icy waters. Back in Europe, Nazi doctors performed hypothermia experiments at Dachau. Prisoners were submerged in tanks of ice water for hours. Their body temperatures were recorded as they shivered, lost consciousness, and ultimately died. The purpose was to determine how long German pilots shot down over the North Sea could survive. Witnesses later described guards timing how long it took before victims stopped screaming. Some prisoners were forced outdoors naked in sub-zero temperatures. Others were subjected to experimental rewarming methods, including being placed under hot lamps or immersed in boiling water, procedures that often caused additional trauma. Fact number 5. high-altitude experiments aimed to simulate conditions at extreme flight levels. In low-pressure chambers, prisoners were exposed to simulated altitudes of over 20,000 meters. As oxygen levels dropped, many convulsed, foamed at the mouth, and died. Observers took notes. It was science detached from humanity. But here is a fact that is often overlooked. Fact number 6. Some data from these experiments were later quietly studied by Allied nations. After the war, during the early years of the Cold War, certain scientific findings, particularly those from Unit 731, were reportedly exchanged for immunity from prosecution. In some cases, researchers evaded trial by handing over their data to occupying forces. Justice, it seemed, was complicated by geopolitics.
Fact number 7. Women were targeted for sterilization experiments. At Auschwitz and other camps, female prisoners were subjected to radiation aimed at rendering them infertile. Others received injections designed to damage reproductive organs. The goal was mass sterilization without surgery, a method that could be applied on a large scale to populations deemed undesirable. Many survivors suffered lifelong pain, infections, and psychological trauma. Fact number 8. Chemical burns were intentionally inflicted to test treatments. In some camps, wounds were deliberately created and infected with bacteria to simulate battlefield injuries. Chemicals were applied to measure reaction times and healing processes. Prisoners endured excruciating pain while doctors observed. And yet, despite the scale of cruelty, documentation was meticulously kept. Photographs, charts, reports, signatures. Which leads to fact number 9. Many perpetrators believed they would never face consequences. They operated under the assumption that the regime would last indefinitely. The war, they believed, would be won. The experiments would be justified as necessary sacrifices. They were wrong. As Allied forces advanced and camps were liberated, the full scale of what had occurred began to emerge. Survivors stepped forward, documents were seized, and the world struggled to process the idea that medicine, a profession built on healing, had been weaponized. Fact number 10. The exposure of these experiments led directly to the creation of modern medical ethics codes. In the aftermath of the war, the doctor's trial, part of the broader proceedings held in Nuremberg, prosecuted 23 medical professionals for crimes against humanity. Testimonies described freezing tanks, sterilization wards, and experimental surgeries in horrifying detail. Out of these trials emerged the Nuremberg Code, a set of principles establishing voluntary consent as absolutely essential in human experimentation. The world had learned at an unbearable cost that science without ethics becomes indistinguishable from barbarism. But this is only the beginning, because beyond the infamous names and headline crimes lie lesser-known experiments, hidden facilities, and stories of survival that reveal not only the depths of cruelty, but also the resilience of those who endured it. In the next part, we will dive deeper into specific case studies, personal survivor testimonies, and the lesser-known experiments conducted not only in Europe and Asia, but across other occupied territories. The question is not just how this happened. The question is how ordinary professionals convinced themselves it was justified. When Allied troops liberated the camps in 1945, they expected to find starvation, forced labor, and mass graves. What many were not prepared for were the laboratories, the rooms with tiled walls, the cabinets filled with labeled specimens, the meticulous files documenting temperatures, pulse rates, organ weights, and death times. Behind the barbed wire of Ravensbrück, a camp primarily for women, a series of experiments unfolded that survivors would later describe in chilling detail. Fact number 11. At Ravensbrück, Polish women known as the rabbits were deliberately mutilated to simulate battlefield injuries. Young women from the Polish resistance were selected. Their legs were cut open, muscles were sliced, bones were fractured. Wood splinters, glass shards, and bacteria were inserted into the wounds to create infections resembling those suffered by German soldiers on the Eastern Front. Doctors then tested sulfonamide drugs to measure effectiveness. Many of the women developed gangrene. Some were executed to hide the evidence. Others survived and later testified during post-war trials. They described being held down while scalpels cut into living flesh without adequate anesthesia. One survivor recalled hearing doctors debate dosages while she lay awake, listening to the sound of her own tissue being stitched. Fact number 12. Children were not spared. At Neuengamme, 20 Jewish children were subjected to tuberculosis experiments. They were injected with the bacteria to study disease progression. Lymph nodes were surgically removed. As the war neared its end and Allied forces advanced, the SS attempted to eliminate evidence. The children were murdered in the basement of a school building in Hamburg. Their ages ranged from 5 to 12. Fact number 13. Poison experiments were conducted to test silent killing methods.
At Buchenwald, prisoners were given food laced with toxins. Some were shot with bullets coated in poison to observe the speed and symptoms of death. Autopsies followed. Notes were recorded. Efficiency was evaluated. These were not chaotic acts of cruelty. They were structured experiments with objectives, controls, and conclusions. But the ideology behind them was just as significant as the procedures themselves. Many Nazi doctors subscribed to racial hygiene theories, a belief that certain populations were biologically inferior. In their worldview, experimentation on these individuals was not murder. It was scientific advancement serving a greater good. Fact number 14. Forced sterilization programs preceded many camp experiments. Even before the war escalated, Germany had enacted laws allowing compulsory sterilization of individuals deemed genetically unfit. By the time mass camp sterilizations began, the bureaucratic machinery was already in place. Camps simply accelerated and radicalized what had begun in hospitals and clinics. Radiation machines were used in attempts to find a quick sterilization method. Victims suffered severe burns. Some died from radiation sickness. Others lived with chronic pain and infertility. Meanwhile, in Asia, the activities of Unit 731 were expanding. Fact number 15. Frostbite experiments in Manchuria mirrored hypothermia studies in Europe. Prisoners had their limbs exposed to freezing temperatures until the skin hardened like wood. Guards sometimes struck frozen arms with sticks to demonstrate how solid they had become. Once frostbite set in, various rewarming techniques were tested, including immersion in hot water and exposure to open flames. Former members of Unit 731 later admitted that they could determine the stage of frostbite by the sound produced when tapping the limb. Fact number 16. Biological weapons were tested on civilian populations. Plague-infected fleas were dispersed over Chinese cities. Wells were contaminated with cholera. Entire communities were unknowingly turned into field laboratories. The death toll from these biological attacks is still debated by historians, but estimates reach into the hundreds of thousands. And yet, after the war, many Unit 731 officials were granted immunity in exchange for their research data. Unlike the Nazi doctors' trial, which unfolded publicly, much of the accountability in the Pacific Theater remained obscured by Cold War politics. Fact number 18. Some victims attempted resistance even inside laboratories. In Ravensbrück, the Polish rabbits secretly communicated, documented their wounds, and vowed to testify if they survived. At Auschwitz, some twins tried to shield each other during examinations. In Unit 731 facilities, prisoners sometimes sabotaged equipment when guards were distracted. These acts were small, often symbolic, but they represented something the experiments could not extinguish: agency. Fact number 19. Not all medical personnel agreed, but few openly refused. Post-war interrogations revealed that some nurses and assistants felt unease. A handful requested transfers, but outright refusal was rare. The structure of authority, fear of punishment, ideological indoctrination, and career ambition created an environment where compliance became normalized. One defendant at the doctor's trial argued that he was following orders. Another claimed that wartime necessity justified extraordinary measures. The tribunal rejected those defenses. The court proceedings in Nuremberg exposed detailed reports of experiments at camps including Auschwitz and Dachau. Survivors faced their former tormentors across the courtroom. Some perpetrators showed no visible remorse. Fact number 20. The scale of documentation made denial impossible. Unlike many atrocities hidden by chaos, these experiments were logged with scientific precision. Charts of body temperatures during freezing, timelines of infection onset, photographs of surgical sites. The very obsession with data collection became evidence in court. And yet, there remains a deeply unsettling question. How did ordinary medical students become capable of this? Historians have pointed to gradual moral erosion, to propaganda, to professional ambition, to peer pressure, to normalization of dehumanizing language. Victims were rarely called by name. They were numbers, specimens, material. Language reshaped perception. Perception reshaped action. As the war drew to a close, many doctors attempted to destroy records. Some fled. Others blended back into civilian life, resuming medical careers quietly. A few were eventually tracked down decades later. But beyond legal accountability lies a deeper legacy. Fact number 20. These experiments reshaped global bioethics permanently. The horrors revealed during the doctor's trial did not simply punish individuals, they forced the international community to redefine the boundaries of research. The Nuremberg Code established voluntary consent as essential. Later declarations, including the Declaration of Helsinki, built upon those principles.
Modern institutional review boards, informed consent forms, and research oversight committees trace their origins to the revelations of these crimes. The suffering of thousands became the foundation for ethical safeguards meant to prevent repetition. But history warns us of something else. Scientific progress, when fused with ideology and stripped of accountability, can turn catastrophic. The individuals who conducted these experiments did not see themselves as villains in a horror story. Many believed they were patriots, innovators, or pioneers. When the gates were opened and the guards fled, silence settled over the camps in a way no one had ever heard before. For years, the air had been filled with commands, screams, machinery, boots on gravel. Now there were only survivors, skeletal, disoriented, blinking into a freedom that felt unreal. Among them were the living evidence of experiments that had reduced human beings to data points. One of the most powerful testimonies came from twins who survived the selections at Auschwitz. As children, they remembered the moment of arrival, the chaos of the ramp, the barking dogs, the shouted orders. Then the question, Zwillinje, twins. When they raised their hands, they were separated from their parents forever. They were housed together but isolated from others. They were measured constantly. Blood was drawn in large quantities. One twin might be injected with a substance that caused severe fever. The other would serve as a control. If one died, the other was often killed so comparative autopsies could be performed. Survivors later testified that Josef Mengele would sometimes appear calm, even polite, offering sweets before procedures. That contrast, superficial civility masking lethal intent, became one of the most psychologically disturbing elements in many accounts. The trauma did not end with liberation. Fact number 21. Many survivors suffered lifelong medical consequences from unknown substances injected into their bodies. Some experienced chronic infections, reproductive disorders, neurological symptoms, or unexplained pain. In numerous cases, there were no medical records detailing exactly what had been administered. Doctors, decades later, could only speculate. At Ravensbrück, the Polish women known as the Rabbits carried visible scars on their legs for the rest of their lives. Muscles had been cut and infected deliberately. Some limped permanently. Others endured recurring bone infections. Yet they organized reunions after the war, forming support networks to document their experiences and testify against their persecutors. Their courage during the Nuremberg proceedings transformed personal agony into historical record. Meanwhile, in Asia, the survivors of Unit 731 faced a different reality. Fact number 22. For decades, many victims of Japanese biological experimentation received no formal acknowledgement. The secrecy surrounding Unit 731 meant that public awareness in Japan remained limited for years. Some former personnel reintegrated into academic and medical institutions. Survivor testimonies in China described entire families lost to sudden outbreaks of plague and cholera, never fully understanding that these epidemics had been deliberately engineered. In the freezing experiments conducted in Manchuria, some prisoners survived the initial procedure only to face amputation later. Frostbite so severe that tissue blackened and died left permanent disability. Survivors described guards observing their suffering with clinical detachment. Fact number 23. Psychological trauma often manifested decades later. Many former prisoners avoided speaking about their experiences for years. Nightmares, flashbacks, and survivor's guilt became common themes in later interviews. Some could not enter hospitals without panic. The sound of metal instruments clinking together triggered memories of laboratory tables. Children who survived experiments grew into adults who struggled with identity and trust. Being treated as material left deep psychological fractures. Several survivors reported difficulty believing in the fundamental goodness of institutions meant to protect them. At Dachau, hypothermia experiment survivors recalled being submerged repeatedly in icy water. One former prisoner testified that guards sometimes photographed the process as if documenting a sporting event. After the war, he could not endure cold weather without experiencing intense anxiety. Fact number 24. Some perpetrators expressed pride rather than remorse during interrogation. Transcripts from post-war trials reveal a disturbing pattern. A number of defendants argued that their findings contributed to aviation safety or infectious disease research. They framed their actions as unfortunate but necessary under wartime conditions. This moral rationalization alarmed prosecutors. It suggested that the danger was not limited to a single regime, but to any system that allowed ethical boundaries to be suspended in the name of national survival.
And yet, justice was uneven. While the doctor's trial in Nuremberg prosecuted several key figures, others escaped capture. Josef Mengele fled Europe and evaded arrest for decades, living in South America under false identities. His ability to avoid trial became symbolic of incomplete accountability. In the Pacific Theater, the immunity granted to many Unit 731 officials in exchange for data created lingering resentment among victims and historians alike. Fact number 25. The Cold War reshaped the narrative of accountability. As tensions grew between former allies and the Soviet Union, strategic interests sometimes overshadowed moral reckoning. Scientific knowledge, even knowledge born of atrocity, became a bargaining tool. This uncomfortable reality complicated the clean narrative of post-war justice. Yet the exposure of these crimes had undeniable consequences. Medical schools began incorporating ethics training into curricula. The concept of informed consent, now standard in research worldwide, was reinforced not merely as procedure, but as protection against repeating history. Fact number 26.
The language of informed consent was born directly from the ashes of these trials. The Nuremberg Code's first principle states that voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. It was a direct response to a world that had seen what happened when consent was erased. But beyond legal frameworks and ethical codes lies the human dimension. Survivors often face disbelief when they first shared their stories. The scale of cruelty seemed unimaginable. How could licensed physicians cut into healthy limbs? How could scientists infect children with disease? The answer, historians argue, lies in incremental normalization. Fact number 27. Dehumanization preceded experimentation. Propaganda portrayed certain groups as vermin, parasites, or biological threats. Once a population is framed as less than human, moral restraints weaken. The laboratory then becomes an extension of ideology. At Buchenwald, survivors recalled being referred to not by name, but by number. Identity was stripped away before the first incision was ever made. Still, amid horror, there were moments of humanity. Some prisoners comforted each other after procedures. Some nurses quietly offered extra bandages or whispered apologies. A few individuals within the system attempted small acts of mercy, though rarely enough to change outcomes. These fragments of compassion, though limited, remind us that even in systems built on cruelty, individual choices still mattered. As historians continue to analyze archived documents and newly uncovered files, additional details emerge. Personal letters, laboratory notes, marginal comments revealing doubt or chilling enthusiasm. The story of wartime human experimentation is not static history. It continues to evolve as evidence surfaces. When the trials ended and the sentences were carried out, many believed the chapter had closed. Courtrooms in Nuremberg had exposed the photographs. Survivors had testified. The world had watched in disbelief as physicians were convicted not for malpractice, but for crimes against humanity. But history does not end with a verdict. It lingers in institutions, in textbooks, in quiet hospital rooms where consent forms are signed before procedures. It echoes in ethics committees and research boards that now scrutinize every experimental protocol. Fact number 28. The Nuremberg Code became the foundation for modern human research protections worldwide. The principles established after the doctor's trial in Nuremberg were simple but revolutionary. Voluntary consent is essential. Experiments must avoid unnecessary suffering. Subjects may withdraw at any time. Research must yield meaningful results for the good of society. These principles were not abstract philosophy. They were written in response to freezing tanks at Dachau, surgical mutilations at Ravensbrück, infection wards at Auschwitz, and biological laboratories operated by Unit 731. They were written because the world had seen what happens when medicine is severed from morality. Fact number 30. The legacy of these experiments still influences debates about emerging technologies. Today, as science advances into gene editing, artificial intelligence in healthcare, neural implants, and biological enhancement, the memory of wartime experimentation remains a warning. The question is no longer whether science can push boundaries. It always will. The question is who draws the line.
The doctors who conducted experiments during the war often justified themselves with urgency. They spoke of national survival, of extraordinary times demanding extraordinary measures. That rhetoric has echoed in many moments of crisis throughout modern history. And this is where remembrance becomes essential. Fact number 30. Forgetting is the first step toward repetition. When atrocities fade into abstraction, when they become mere statistics rather than lived experiences, the moral lessons weaken. Survivors understood this deeply. Many who testified did so not only for justice, but for warning. One Auschwitz twin survivor later said that telling her story was an act of reclaiming power. During the experiments, she had been reduced to a specimen. In testimony, she became a witness. Across Europe and Asia, memorials now stand where laboratories once operated. At former campsites like Buchenwald and Neuengamme, visitors walk through preserved barracks and reconstructed infirmaries. The rooms feel smaller than expected, the silence heavier. In some cases, glass cases display surgical instruments similar to those used in experiments. Cold metal under bright lights, tools that once symbolized healing, repurposed for harm. The psychological dimension of these crimes also reshaped the understanding of trauma. Survivors helped pioneer discussions around post-traumatic stress long before it became widely recognized. Their experiences forced medical communities to confront not only physical injury, but invisible wounds. And yet, accountability remains incomplete. Joseph Mengele died decades after the war without ever standing trial. Several members of Unit 731 lived long lives, some holding respected positions in post-war Japan. The tension between justice and political expediency left scars of its own. This unresolved aspect of history complicates the narrative. It reminds us that moral clarity in hindsight does not always translate into comprehensive justice. But perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: the perpetrators were not monsters in the mythological sense. They were educated professionals. They attended lectures. They published papers. They advanced careers. The transformation from healer to experimenter did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually through ideology, obedience, ambition, fear, and the steady erosion of empathy. Each small compromise paved the way for the next. Each rationalization dulled moral resistance. That pattern is what makes this history so urgent, because it demonstrates that the capacity for atrocity is not confined to a single nation or era. It exists wherever power operates without oversight, wherever science is weaponized by ideology, wherever human beings are ranked by worth. The victims of wartime human experimentation were stripped of autonomy, identity, and dignity, but their testimonies restored something profound: truth. And truth, documented and remembered, becomes protection. This documentary has explored 20 disturbing and significant facts about human experimentation during the Second World War, from freezing chambers and sterilization programs to biological warfare and courtroom reckoning. These events are not presented to shock for the sake of shock, but to illuminate the consequences of unchecked authority in the name of science. If you made it to this point, comment the word ethics below so we know you stayed until the very end. Tell us in the comments what impacted you the most in this documentary. Your perspective matters. If this content helped you understand history on a deeper level, leave your like. It supports the channel more than you imagine. Subscribe so you don't miss the next documentary, and continue watching the videos that are appearing on your screen right now. Each one dives into real events, real testimonies, and the complex truths behind war. Because remembering is not optional, it is responsibility.